When we look at what's happened in the past year with Moonsigns and Hexerei, it's hard not to think to yourself, could we one day maybe get Knights of Favonius resonance mechanics? Dabbled with the core idea in Natlin, but really took off in a coherent form in Nodcry with Moonsigns, followed shortly after by Hexerei. It's important to notice the difference there. While Natlin's Night Soul mechanics are region-locked and faction-exclusive, Natlin characters' synergies are more implicit, with kit descriptions, functionality, and artifact descriptions doing the work. Moonsign and Hexerei mechanics, by contrast, more explicitly outline faction synergy, going as far as having resonance screens not unlike that of elemental resonances, and clear outlines of what the effects are. There's a fair debate here concerning which actually has done it better, but it should be agreeable enough to say that both have done it. As I said a minute ago though, expecting Genshin's gameplay to continually build upon itself is fair. We see new takes on specific ideas as the game goes on, but once those ideas do hit, the game kind of just rolls with it. And it's for this reason I believe that faction-based team mechanics on the design scale of Moonsigns and Hexerei, they might just be here to stay. Whether for some new Snezhnaya faction or retroactively some faction already in the game. And that's kind of the fun idea I bring today. Just level with me here, but if we are to assume new factions will exist with playable synergies in the future, what would they be? It's easy enough to say the game is going down this path, but it's another to actually have a vision, pun intended. And so, let's just start at the top with a faction that I've already listed, Knights of Favonius. Could the Knights ever get their own faction resonance? Well, what would that even look like? Let's name the playable Knights of Favonius characters. There's Varka, Jean, Eula, Kaya, Albedo, Amber, Klee, Lisa, Mika, Noelle, and Sucrose. There's also Lowen, who at the time of this video isn't out, but he is on his way. So what do we have here? We have a pretty good spread of characters, and several elements as well. There are 3 Animos, 4 Cryos, 2 Pyros, 2 Geos, and an Electro. But notably there are no Hydros or Dendros. I believe this is a good starting point. You have a wide array of characters spanning over several elements. This is critical. The reason Moonsign mechanics and Lunar reactions work is because they are anchored around the Hydro element, and they were built to be that way from the ground up. So the elemental synergy comes out of the bag. But in this case, we're talking about retroactive elemental synergy. And that's the part I believe people may forget when they talk about future factions. It's not just about characters being in the same faction, but they have to have elemental synergies as well as role coverage. This is why, retroactively, the Hexerei mechanics and Hexerei characters fit together so nicely. Every element other than Cryo and Dendro is represented, as well as multiple team roles, from DPS to applicators and buffers. The only real thing the Hexerei are missing is some kind of sustain healer or shielder, but it's not the end of the world either, considering it only takes 2 Hexerei characters to enable the synergy. It's not too hard to slot in a sustain character if you really need one, but for all we know, we could get one day. Going back to the Knights of Favonius though, you have all kinds of characters in the lineup. DPS characters, sub-DPS characters, buffers, healers, shielders. The pieces are all here for the Knights of Favonius to have its own faction synergy. The size of the faction, not to mention many of the characters are older, so you can actually justify buffing them too. However, there is one problem that I see with the Knights of Favonius having a resonance, and that problem is overlap with already existing Hexerei characters. Klee, Albedo, Sucrose, and Varka are all Hexerei characters, and so if you gave them Knight's resonance, would that just mean that they now have both resonances? Yeah, see, that would be going a little too far, so I'm not entirely sure what they would do for this. I think the most logical thing would just be to let them continue being Hexerei characters and not count them towards the Knights. But that does feel kind of weird, right? I don't know, but at least I can make that case for Albedo, Sucrose, and Klee, considering the amount of Hexen Circle focus there is on those characters. To not count Varka as a knight, though, would be inexcusable. That just won't work. Unless he could be a bridge character. And what I mean by that is, he can activate both resonances. So, if you have one other Hexerei character, then the Hexerei resonances unlock, and if you have one other Knight character, then the Knight resonances unlock. And Varka is just between them, he can benefit from both. I think that would be pretty good, that could work. And not to mention, because Varka could actually use some more power anyway. So, I don't think that's a terrible way to go about it, but as far as the others go, Klee, Albedo, and Sucrose, maybe we would just have to let them sit where they are. I think overall though, the Knights have one of the best shots at becoming a faction, because of the size of the faction, the role coverage, and the elemental coverage. I'm not sure they would go down this route, who knows, but I could see it happening. And not to mention they're older characters too, so again, they can benefit from the buffs. Will it happen? I don't know, but we'll see. Moving on from the Knights though, we have other factions to talk about. These maybe not in as much detail, but still I want to throw the possibilities out there. That said, there is one other Mondstadt faction, and that would be the Church of Favonius. Now, this probably wouldn't do too well. It consists of 4-star Barbara, 4-star Rosaria, 4-star Dahlia, and of course Venti. You could try to write other characters into it some way, the same way as a few of the Hexerei characters were kind of written into it, but even still, overall this faction is just too small. There's only 4 outright characters for it, and on top of it, this synergy isn't that great. I mean, I'm sure you could do something with it considering the point of resonances is to make synergy in the first place, right? So certainly you could write resonances among these characters in such a way that they do benefit one another. But I mean, it's just so small and restrictive. You're basically looking at freeze and some kind of swirl, whether it's hydro or cryo swirl, or whatever, unless you add more characters, which, to be fair, they could do that. And similarly, you know, the Hexerei characters do have new characters as well. Durin came out. He was a brand new character to the game and was put in that faction. So that doesn't mean that characters can't come out that would further populate a faction. It's just though, as is, I can't see the Church of Favonius really taking off. And that's kind of where I'm going with this video. You see, it's easy enough to say, hey cool, maybe this other faction will come into play one day. But when you really stop and examine the practicality of things, it can become a lot more questionable. It sounds cool to have the Church of Favonius as a faction with resonance, but practically speaking, it just doesn't seem like something that could ever happen. Or at least not without major additions and a few changes. Moving on from Mondstadt completely though, let's head on over to Liyue. Now, unlike Mondstadt, which has a giant faction in which like the majority of the characters belong to, Liyue is much more loosely defined. It's really hard to look at the characters here and come up with anything that the majority of them could fall under. But there is one good faction that I can think of out of Liyue, and that would be Adepti and Illuminated Beasts. The same way that the Hexerei had to have story relevance and come into focus in order to justify giving those characters buffs, the Adepti and Illuminated Beasts are just powerful enough and just legendary enough that I believe Hoyo could write a story around them in order to give them more justification for a buff as well. And importantly, there's enough of them to justify it, and they span all kinds of elements and roles too. That's very similar to the Knights of Favonius. Obviously, there would be Zhongli, but there's also Xiao, Xianyun, Ganyu, Characters most people wouldn't feel too bad about getting a boost these days. But it's also not just them. Those are just Adepti, but if you expand it to include Adepti-related characters and illuminated beasts, well, then you can get a really good roster going. Yanfei, for instance, is a half-illuminated beast, but she has a really close relationship with Madame Ping, who she even calls Granny. So, there's a character for you. Similarly, you could probably sneak Shinhe in there due to her relationship with Xian Yun. No, she's not an Adeptus or anything like that, but people do mistake her for one. Through some clever writing, she could definitely fit in there, especially if you have to go through stories in order to unlock the residents, the same way you have to do homework for the Hexerei characters. And on that note, you could probably write something for Chi-Chi, considering she's kept alive with Adeptal energy. Not to mention, also Guoba, the stove god, so that would put Xiangling in there too. Zebai becomes more questionable because she's already a part of the moon sign lunar resonances, and she's not quite an Adeptus in the same way that the modern Adepti are more subordinate to Rex Lapis. So I'm not entirely sure about putting her here. She's probably just better off in the lunar chain, but yeah, I do believe that Adepti and Illuminated Beasts could make a pretty functional faction in Liyue, and it would be a good way to buff up a lot of the roster there. Moving on to Inazuma though, the characters here feel just as much, if not even more disconnected, as the characters in Liyue, at least as far as a faction coherency goes. And so, it's really difficult to think of one unifying factor here that could really give a lot of Inazuma characters buffs and resonances under the same banner. That has to be remembered. It's not enough to say that characters from X Nation should have a team synergy or a team resonance built around them. That's not what Hoyoverse did with the lunar mechanics and the moon signs, nor is it what they did with the Hexerei. They wrote these resonances into the very fabric of the story itself, some kind of narrative justification. That's why in Liyue's case, it was kind of difficult to come up with anything. And even then, I can't imagine that it would happen unless some brand new Adeptus or something is introduced in the next Lantern Rite. And then they built the Liyue resonance off of that. So going back to Inazuma, there's really only two viable factions that I can think of. The first deals with Inazuma's government itself. Say, some kind of resonance built around the Tri-Commission faction. This would give you Kujo Sara and Shikanon Heizo from the Tenryou Commission, as well as Ayato, Ayaka, Toma, and maybe even Sayu based around the Yashiro Commission. And of course, as the head of state, you could put the Shogun in there, and as someone who is very closely affiliated with the commissions, perhaps even Yaimiko. Also, perhaps a brand new character from the Kanjo Commission, since the Kanjo Commission doesn't even have a playable character yet. This could work. I mean, you have DPS characters, sub-DPS characters, buffers, you have healers. I mean, everything is here. No Geo or Dendro characters, but again, you could always release a character that does this. My only thing is contriving a way for this to happen. Again, moon signs, moon wheels, the Hexerei, this is all interwoven into the fabric of the story itself. In this case, you're just talking about giving the Tri-Commission characters some kind of buff. I'm not sure what you would do here, that's the thing. I mean, it could work, I believe it could work, functionally speaking. But what's the reason? That's where I'm lost. I feel like it would require some kind of major Inazuma revisit and some kind of major lore integration. Which, to be fair, that's the case for all of these, right? But that's what I'm saying too. Inazuma has been out of the spotlight for a pretty good while, so it would be interesting to see how they do it. But there is another Inazuma faction that comes to mind, and this one would be based on the yokai. Now, as of now, that's just Miko, Sara, Ito, Kirara, and Mizuki. So already the problem with this faction is it's not big enough to do the whole mix and match thing. Also, there's only a spread of 4 elements, 2 of which are Geo and Anemo, which kills another elemental pairing. This would require like a couple of simultaneous character drops, preferably of different elements, and also those that can benefit Ito as well as be synergistic with Mizuki. That said, it's not impossible, especially considering that we're only talking about 2 characters to unlock a resonance. You don't need a whole team, so you could definitely write kits for characters that can bridge the gap here, but yeah, that's what you would have to do because as is, this faction just ain't cutting it. But I do like the idea, and that's the notion that I close this discussion with. A reminder that these are only ideas. My brainstorming here is based on what I believe to be logical criteria for the foundation of factions. Those criteria being that they need a narrative, story-driven reason to justify their existence, that there needs to be an adequate character count and elemental spread in order to actually make resonances both possible and logical, and that there should be some kind of thematic cohesion among the characters that unite them under the same banner. Which, yeah, that's literally what a faction is, which is why I don't think it's enough to say let's give W, X, Y, and Z characters some kind of resonance and call it a day. That all said though, that doesn't mean Hoyoverse couldn't just do that. They very well could just bundle up characters and say, okay, here's a blanket Leeway resonance or Inazuma resonance. And I mean, hey, whatever, right? At least old characters would maybe get some love. It's just, coming off the heels of faction resonances like Moonsigns and Hexerei, it would feel lazy and uninspired to just do it like that. And considering they've put so much thought into faction resonance as of late, I feel like in the future they'd be just as likely to do so. A few rapid fire ideas here for the wrap up. Sumeru, okay. I'd say the Academia could have some kind of resonance, but there's one problem with it. Nahida, Alhaitham, Sino, Farazan, Kaveh, Layla, Tanari. I guess Sethos if you want to be really charitable, but that's breaking the bounds a little bit. 4 of the 7 certain characters are Dendro. The others are Electro, Animo, and Cryo. Keeping in mind 2 character resonances, you could definitely work with this, but to really get the team mixes going, I feel another Dendro reactive element in the lineup would be good. Perhaps a brand new Pyro character. Fontaine? No idea there, especially because it's kind of the gateway region into modern Genshin, with Natlan being on the other side. I feel like a heavy rework of Numa and Oisa mechanics would serve the Fontaine cast well. But a lot of the Fontaine cast isn't terrible by modern standards, just a modern rework of the Numa and Oisa system with some added resonances and passives would probably be enough there. And then from Natlan on, nothing. They perfected the form with the Moonsigns and Hexerei, but true regional mechanics really did blossom in Natlan. Natlan artifacts, Night Soul mechanics, and Night Soul burst synergies across the team are synergistic. They just don't have actual resonances. Then again, by the time all the older regions are caught up, it might actually be justifiable to give Natlan characters true resonances. But that would be incredibly far in the future even so. One last idea, and this one isn't even regional, that would be Archon resonances. Whether or not this would include Columbina is up to you, but she's strong enough with the Moonsign resonances in my opinion. Plus, that would double up on Hydro because of Farina. Either way, I think this would be a nice close-knit group, and naturally, by the time it's all over, every element would be represented. As for a Venti and Zhongli resonance, I don't know, but that's the point in having 2 additional characters on the team, right? I'm sure you could find reasons to run both, especially when the resonances are written specifically to make that happen. Yeah man, that would be cool. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm interested in what others think as well. Do you think we'll get more faction-based resonances? What would or wouldn't work? Let me know and put it down below. Keep it easy, take it easy. Have a good one. P-Squeak2 out. And yes, I left out Diluc. He's not a knight anymore.